Hi, everyone. I am Caroline Corey. I'm the writer, director, producer of the new film Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible. The film is about the power of the human mind on the physical world, physical reality, our physical body, how the two, mind and matter, interact. This has been the story of my life. And so we hear a lot about that the mind affects the body, affect our health. But what I wanted to do in this film is not just talk about it, but more demonstrate how it's actually possible for the mind to interact with the physical world and have an actual measurable effect. Because of this, I started working with scientists actually for the last few years, doing all kinds of experiments. We would remotely project consciousness on water to affect its pH, or a device, an electronic device, electrical device, even a physical object, and we would have actual measurable effects over and over and over. And so, I said, wait, this is real. And so I wanted to invite in the film the top, those who are at the top level in this field that we call parapsychology, which is a bit strange for me because it's not parapsychology in a sense. This is real science as far as I'm concerned. And so the first person that came to mind, of course, is Dean Radin. He is an incredible pioneer in this field. Originally, his background, degree in electrical engineering, PhD in psychology, written numerous books, including Entanglement, Supernormal, and among others. And he also has been conducting, he's the chief scientist at IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences. And so, in their lab, they also have been doing all kinds of incredible experiments. So he was a perfect fit for the film. And I cannot believe it. He's here with me today. And we're going to just talk about the film, actually being part of the film, but also Dean was able to watch the film as an observer after the fact. And so I just wanted to bring him back and see what his experience was and what he thinks about the work and what he's been doing in the field as well, because he's been ahead of the curve. And so I wanted to know where he's at with his own research and what's happening in the field. And so for those who are just joining, by the way, welcome. We are broadcasting on many channels, YouTube and several Facebook pages at the same time. So feel free to start typing your questions. We have Michael who's here. Michael, say hi.
Hey, Caroline. Hey, Dr. Radin. How's everybody doing today? Thanks again for watching. And I haven't seen anyone's comments yet in Facebook, so I'm still making posts.
Good.
But I just wanted to let everyone know, as well as Dr. Radin's fans and all the followers at Noetic Sciences, just made a post on Facebook, so hopefully everyone saw that. Please jump in the chat and give us your comments and questions.
Yeah, absolutely, because we're going to have a conversation. Then I would love to have questions for Dr. Radin. Okay, I'm going to bring him in right now. So, hello, Dean, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, good, there's a bit of a delay. Yeah, perfect. So, Dean, you heard me. We are all, it's such an honor to be talking to you, to be working with you, because you've been in the field for so long. And every time I talk to you, I ask you, so what kind of experiments you're working on? And there's always the next thing and the next thing. But how was your experience being in the film? But also, now that you've watched the film, what did you think about what we've done in the film? What was your observation?
Well, my portion of the film actually had nothing to do with mind and matter interaction. It was just a demonstration of a presentiment experiment, a kind of unconscious precognition. So that's okay. I mean, that's what we had running available at the time. Uh, we have other experiments that just happened to be at the time you were there. They weren't active, so there's nothing to film that are more related to mind matter interaction. Uh, as far as the film goes, I would say that the things that I had not seen before, which I thought were interesting, were the blindfold reading or blindfold seeing. So I'm familiar with cases in India and China and Germany and a few other countries that have been training children primarily to use blindfold masks. Uh, at least from the visually, it doesn't look very impressive because you really never know what you're seeing when you're looking at a video. But I did think that some of the cases, like there's the woman who had macular degeneration who is learning to see again, that's much more impressive because you can't just will that away. Something must have happened as a result. So you very kindly sent me one of the masks. So I was
Yay!
able to play with the mask, and then it has a pretty good squishy rubber behind it. So when an adult is wearing the mask properly, you really can't see anything. If a child wears this mask, I would be a little bit more cautious because their face is smaller and there might be the possibility of having a gap in it. But I don't know. The kind of performance that you were seeing the children do, like running and doing things like that, it might be peaking, but it doesn't look like it. And so the other thing I thought that was interesting was the Italian researchers who were measuring the amount of light coming in, and there it suggested there really was no external light. So I don't know what to make of that, other than it's very interesting, and I'd like to follow it up.
That's great. Yeah. So I'm glad you're trying it for yourself because it's true. Look, you look online on YouTube or whatever, you see all kinds of people doing all kinds of stuff. And you don't know, is this a trick? Is this a camera effect or whatever? But in every field, there is that, right? So I totally agree. And in fact, I actually have heard of some folks that, were also maybe cheating or whatever they were doing. So I can't speak for those. But when I first watched it, it was so intriguing, like you. It was like, wait, that I wanted to investigate it. I wanted to go deeper into that possibility. And of course, try it for myself. That's what I encourage everybody to do.
Right.
So when you put the mask on, I mean, it's blackout, right? Like you do not have any light whatsoever. And I don't know if you started doing it the way I suggested, but after a while, even though there is no light whatsoever, you start to kind of see something, right? And so did that happen to you, by the way? Did you start to kind of get any sort of little sparks or anything like that?
Well, you might start to see something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's light. In other words,
Exactly.
that you can internally generate images and snippets of light, but it's not coming from the outside. It's coming from somewhere else. So
Right.
that makes it difficult to know then, is this simply a mental projection? I'm projecting an image, or is it actually out there? So I haven't gotten to the point yet where I have a stable image. I just get flashes every now and then. But of course, the proof is in the pudding. If you get a stable image and then that image corresponds to what's actually going on outside, well, then it becomes very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so that's what happens. So for kids, as you're working with kids, what happens is you tell them put the masks on, and even if there's a little bit of light actually on the side, it doesn't mean, and you put something in front of them, it still doesn't. It still requires for you to look to that thing in front of you or behind you, by the way.
Right.
And
So in front, given the way that many of the children are looking at it, they're not looking with their heads forward. They're looking like this, which of course immediately raises suspicion that they can in fact see through a crack.
Yes, exactly.
So that's why cases where they're looking at something behind is much more interesting. And you could also make a case that if what's going on here is something like clairvoyance, like they're just learning to see with their mind's eye somehow, then one of the experiments that I would do if I ever get around to doing experiments like this is to, once you get somebody who's able to see, to do it in a dark room. So there is no light. So even if there was a way to peek, they would not be able to see it. And so one of the things I've learned over the years is, because I've worked with a number of magicians, people who are faking it, and I have a pretty good library of magical books and magical tricks that you could put on all kinds of very fancy blindfolds and tape your eyes and all kinds of stuff, and a magician could see right through it. So oftentimes it's because the blindfolds themselves are gimmicked, and so they're actually not as opaque as they look. So you have to. I learned to be very skeptical about, especially someone who, from the outside at least, looks like they're peeking. That's not good enough. But it's still true. It doesn't mean that they are peeking. It may mean that they're getting a little bit of peripheral light and they somehow learn to turn that into a method of seeing. But I would want to do a long series of tests. So I would say then that what we see in your movie then is a case where you do wonder, is that for real? Right? And it should inspire people at least to go try it for themselves. And that's then how you see some people probably have a talent that will get sparked by this, and maybe they can do it for real.
Yeah. And so when you do, like when I first started using it myself, because I wanted to go through the process. I'm like you, trust me, like even though I've had experiences my entire life, I've seen things, heard things, all kinds of stuff since I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
But this specific technique was like beyond, it's like, what? You close your eyes and you can see.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go through the exercise myself. So I put the blindfolds on, completely dark. And what I noticed after a while is you start to see a little bit of light, even though you don't touch the mask. You start to see the light on the side first. You start to see things on the side first. Like in front of me was total black darkness. And on the side, I would see things. And then when we work with other people, that was also the first thing that showed up on the side. So it makes me think that maybe peripheral vision comes on first. I'm not an expert in vision or brain, but because it was consistent with most people and children as well. So what happens is when children start to see better on the side, they start doing this, they start wanting to do this. And what you actually see are little dots of light. And so one of the techniques is, the idea is, if you see light, whether it's light or a projection, doesn't matter, but it looks like a little spark of light, you focus on it and you intend for it to grow. Whether, again, it's a suggestion or it doesn't matter. You just kind of do that. This is one of the techniques. And before you know it, that light becomes bigger and bigger. And then it gives you the impression, the illusion that you are seeing through the mask. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the techniques. And so, and it works. I mean, eventually. Unfortunately, with adults, it takes a long time because the mind kicks in, what am I doing? Is this even possible? This doesn't work. This will take forever. But kids, after
they don't know any better. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and one of the things about the rods and the cones in the eye, you're more sensitive to light on the periphery than you are in the center. So if you ever go into a very dark room that is like a dark room, before you turn on the red light, if you just wait long enough, you'll begin to see light. But the moment that you move your eye to look at that light, you can't see it anymore.
There you go.
Right. So you can see it in the periphery first. You can see very low levels of light, but you can't focus on it.
Exactly.
So I think what you're saying then for training actually makes sense. You can get the sense of light and then maybe mentally expand the light, and then you're no longer seeing with your eyes, you're seeing some other way.
With your brain is what I mean,
I don't think it's the brain, no. The brain and the eyes are physical creatures, and it would not be able to see in the way that is shown in the film. It would be something else. I would say it's seeing with the mind. It's the mind's eye.
Yeah, exactly. And so I also wanted to say that it was because I personally have done remote viewing and, for a long time. So I'm kind of used to seeing with what people call third eye. And so when I started doing the blindfold, it was actually difficult because I was seeing, like long distance, and I had to kind of like saying, no. I want to see, like literally see through the blindfold. I had to kind of reprogram myself a little bit. And this is where the peripheral light started to come through. And everyone that we've worked with, it was the same. So for the people which I totally understand, if you don't know any better and you're looking at it for the first time and you see people do this, that's what you think. Yeah. But it is because of the peripheral thing. And so, but also.
Let me ask a question. Because this thing is constructed in a way that you can have your eye open.
Yes.
So you do this with your eyes open?
Yes. So one technique is with the eyes open, because also I think what happens is you're training yourself to, when your eyes are open, that you should see whether there is a barrier or not. Mm-hmm. But another technique, the folks in Utah, they completely they tape the eyes. And sometimes they do a double, like they put more than one layer and this mask, which as you saw is pretty dark. I mean, it is a blackout. So taping the eyes and the mask makes it pretty, remarkable that they're
So they're learning how to do it with eyes closed.
Exactly. So what I've discovered working with different groups, some groups work with the eyes closed and other groups work with the eyes open. And so, for example, the folks in Utah who do it with the eyes completely shut, they focus more on training your vibration. So it's like sensing the vibration of objects to a point where it becomes so precise, so clear that you identify what the object is. And so, because their background is martial arts, and so it's a whole school, and this was an extension of what they did before, but they're working with blind folks, using the same technique to literally see with that sort of clarity without the cane and obviously the braille. Obviously. And so that's them. But most the other schools, the ones in Russia, Romania, the InfoVision, for example, and folks in the UK, they train with the eyes open. And this is also what happens. So, the peripheral comes on first, you expand the light, and before you know it, you start to see.
Yeah. So, if we have enough people out there who are learning how to do this, and some get good enough to be able to want to come into the laboratory to test these kinds of things in the lab, I'm sure we'd be very happy to do that.
I would love to do that. Actually, we were talking about this lab. We actually found a location and everything. We start working on protocols and COVID happens. So it is what it is right now. But so we just taught a class online and it was with kids. And after 2 classes, they were able to read and do a puzzle after 2 classes. So we can have those kids. Yeah.
You mean like a Zoom? You did a Zoom class?
Yeah, on Zoom. And the parents are there because we needed them to, because it's Zoom, to mute and unmute and, like the technical stuff. And so we knew that they had the mask on correctly and they were really doing it. It's, and we have those videos. We uploaded them on our website. So something is happening.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and so I don't know how physically we can do this, but I would love to investigate this even further because to me, I mean, it's one thing the telekinesis, we did it, or the water pH. Okay, you look at the device, you see the measurement, and it makes sense. Even with telekinesis, you're also doing things with telekinesis. We create a baseline, we wait, and then we kind of try to influence it. And that's measurable and you can see. But then, and I don't know, that explanation, so everybody has what is your explanation for telekinesis, for example, when it is under vacuum? So the one we did in the film, as you know, we showed it gradually. At one point, we literally had the vacuum, the piece of paper was in its own little Faraday cage, and we were able to influence it. So how, from the outside, so how do you explain that?
Well, the first way to explain these things that most people think of is that we're dealing with some kind of force, right? Because that's what physics knows. We make things happen by pushing against them. When you think about the kinds of forces that could be brought to bear here, physics only knows about 4 forces. Maybe electromagnetism is the force that's involved. And so it involves things like electrostatic forces and electric charges and things of that sort. So for any kind of test that involves a close-up object, like an object within about a foot or 2 feet from somebody, it's conceivable that humans could act like electric eels under the right conditions, because we have all kinds of electrolytes inside our body, and so we can create an electric field. So the electric field might do something. That kind of explanation doesn't work very well when you're dealing with distances that are more than 2 meters or 3 meters away, because the amount of force that you can push through electromagnetics, especially as generated by the body, is so weak that you're not going to pick up anything. And of course, it completely fails if we're talking about distances of 10, 20 meters or beyond. And we do see results that take place at a distance. So you're kind of left with, if it's not one of the forces, well, then what is it? So you have to take a more radical way of thinking about the nature of reality. And so the direction that I've been moving in is saying, well, given that we're faced with a puzzle where we have a lot of data over many years suggesting that the mind and matter interact in some fundamental way, and it's really difficult to explain how that works from the current scientific worldview, which is materialism, which basically says that everything's made out of matter and energy. Well, maybe there's a more comprehensive way of thinking about this. So when you look at the philosophy of science, and this has to do with the assumptions that we make within science, it turns out that materialism is just one way of thinking about reality, and there are many, many other ways. So the way that I've kind of selected as my working hypothesis is sometimes called neutral monism. And this says that mind and matter are both fundamentals in the universe. It's simply the way that physical reality is created is like when you make a tapestry with a warp in a weave. Well, the warp is mind and the weave is matter. It's, reality consists of both of these things. They're both fundamental. If that is the case, and I use the metaphor here of mind and matter are like 2 sides of the same coin. They're both independent things, but they're tightly bound. So they're correlated with each other very tightly. And when you look at the neurosciences, what's called the neural correlates of consciousness, you see very tight correlations between what's going on in the brain and what's going on subjectively, like in your consciousness. And within the mainstream science, you would then say, well, the direction of the causation, like forgetting that it's a correlation, you're saying, well, what's happening is that the brain is causing mental activity. But what you're actually measuring are correlations. You're seeing a relationship between brain activity and internal states. So I said, well, maybe the correlation is not brain to mind, but the other way around. It's mind to brain. And so how would we test that idea? And that would be very radical from a scientific perspective, but nevertheless, it's testable. So one of the ways of testing it would be to say, if mind and matter really are tightly correlated with each other, then whenever you do something mentally, there should be a corresponding physical relationship to it. Most of the time, that's like in our head, where brain-mind connection, but maybe mind is not limited in the same way that the physical world is. And so maybe I can have an object of attention which is outside myself, and I can do something mentally and I can see the effect happen outside, because now I've created a correlation that's not just inside, but outside. So there are hundreds of experiments, like the ones that you did are a tiny little subset of a very large body of experiments, most of which involve physical systems called random number generators.
Sure.
So these are electronic coin flippers, just randomly spinning off the equivalent of flipping coins. So in a typical experiment like that, you have a random generator somewhere else. You're mentally thinking, I want it to produce more ones than zeros if it's producing random bits. And through lots of experiments, that's what we see people can do. So again, if you try to take that experiment and explain it as somehow force beams are shooting out of your head and influencing the circuitry, it doesn't work very well, because these experiments work at far distances too. So how does that work? Well, if you don't see it as force, but you see it rather from a different perspective of reality consisting of fundamental mind, fundamental matter that are related to each other. Physical reality is localized, except for quantum entanglement, but we can skip over that. So you can imagine physical reality is kind of localized, but the mind is not localized. You can, in your mind, go anywhere in space or time. So you simply say, okay, that my target then I'm going to connect with matter over there, which happens to be a random generator, and I'm going to become very coherent mentally, like I'll go into a mental meditative state. If my meditative state, which is a state of coherence, if that's mimicked in matter, and the matter in this case happens to be a random number generator, then you can see that immediately by looking at the statistics of what is happening in the randomness.
What do you mean by mimic?
Well,
how does the mind mimics a physical object at a distance?
Yeah. So if we're talking about a intimate relationship between mind and matter, that's usually seen as a correlation. So if the mind side of the coin becomes very coherent, then the matter side has to become coherent because they're closely related to each other. So if the matter side of this coin we're talking about happens to be a random number generator, then it's not going to behave randomly anymore. It's going to behave in a coherent manner, kind of similar to what happens in your mind when you become coherent. So they're not going to be exactly the same because one is an object and one is you. Nevertheless, there should be the correlation. So I become coherent mentally, the device becomes coherent in a form in which it can become coherent. And if you have a random system, coherence in a random system can be detected through statistics very easily. That's why we use random systems. Random systems have a very characteristic way of behaving. And the moment that a random system starts to behave in an orderly fashion, that's dramatically different than the way it's supposed to behave. And you can see that.
But I have to interrupt because this is fascinating. I love everything you're saying. But why is coherence for the device? How does it know that coherence mean a 0 or a 1? Is it because I'm becoming coherent with 0? Or does it, like, you see what I mean? Like, what is coherence for me is not the same as coherence for the device.
Yes, that's a very good question. And so the true answer is I don't know.
Okay.
But the answer I can give then, my speculation, is that mental coherence, that's why I use the word mimicked, right? It's like, what would a random number generator do if it became coherent? You know, like what can it do? It's not a living thing, but it nevertheless, because of the correlation between mind and matter, it has to go into some form of coherence. So one form of coherence in a system that is completely random is to just start spitting out all ones. That would be coherent. Or maybe it all spits out all zeros. Or another form of coherence would be, rather than just randomly having zeros and ones, it's just going to be 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, in a pattern. So patterns
Pattern.
will start to appear where there shouldn't be any patterns. And that's how you can detect that coherence is arising in a system that is not supposed to have any patterns.
That makes sense. From random becoming manifest or turning into a pattern.
Right.
That makes sense. That would be coherence that, people would understand. So is this when people say you create your reality, now that both are kind of interconnected in that way? When people say your mind creates your reality, do you think now we're affecting a device, but is this how we're actually interacting with people or the house or the job, even abstract concepts? Is our situation or the physical body? Do you see any difference in that correlation?
In principle, no. That there should be any object of attention will be part of your reality. And so if your mental state changes, then that part of your reality should change too. The thing is that like in a random number generator, it's a physical object, so it can only do certain things, right? It only does ones and zeros. That's all it's designed to do. So we can detect when patterns arise using statistics. But in your everyday life, you're dealing with so many different kinds of physical systems. You might be thinking along a certain way, but they don't have any way to change, or it has a very limited way that could be changed that you could detect. So, for example, I'll take an extreme case where I affirm in my reality that I'm going to be given a gold-plated Mercedes.
Okay.
Okay. So this is now, I want this in my reality. So my suspicion then is that the moment that you bring that to mind, that the probabilistic nature of the world starts to move in a way to make that more likely. But it might take it from a probability of 1 in a trillion of happening to 1 in a billion, right? That's a pretty significant change, but it's still only 1 in a billion. And this has to do with the nature of what is necessary in order to happen for the gold-plated Mercedes to show up, right? You can come up with all kinds of scenarios, but most of them are very unlikely. And so we can tweak the probabilities, but not tweak it sufficiently so that it's very likely to show up. It's just more probable to show up.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, I feel that as we are projecting the mind, you're creating sort of momentum. Like, when was the last time you asked or you thought about getting a gold-plated Mercedes? You probably just made it up now. Whereas I would like to, I don't know, go on a vacation to Bali or something. You probably thought about that many times over the past year or so. And so that mind matter interaction, if you will, has created more momentum. So the probability of you being able to manifest going to Bali is probably much faster than the one you just made up that is still at 1 in a billion. I feel like that has a lot to do with your kind of thinking about it, putting it out there. But I think the problem that people struggle with is the direct cause and effect. So I'm thinking, oh, I want to buy a house, or I want to attract money, or I'm thinking about this over and over, but I don't see it happen instantaneously. Whereas, if I'm focusing on, water and wanting to affect it, it does, or the piece of paper in the case of telekinesis, what have you. So I think it's because once, it's like when we are thinking of creating that sort of reality for ourselves, there's so much the dynamic, but also, do you think the time component or the time space component is not linear? And so so the side of the coin that has to do with materializing your mind goes into a different kind of formula, where the world of probability is not so linear. That's why we don't see the cause and effect. And we think this will never happen, or why is this not happening, or why is this happening to me? What do you think about that?
Well, so in the laboratory, there's one mind typically dealing with one very specific system where you have a certain measurement in mind, like you know what you're going to measure. It almost creates like a bubble against which like nobody else knows that you're doing the experiment. So there are no other minds that are involved. It's a very constrained space. And typically the target of the mind is small. It's like a minor thing that can need only tiny little bits in order to change it. So that's why you can see these things in the laboratory. So we know that in principle, yeah, these things happen. As soon as you start thinking about real world effects, whether it's a Mercedes or traveling or getting money or whatever it is, it's no longer you. It's not just you and the thing of interest, it's you and the rest of the world. So to go back to my gold-plated Mercedes idea, that has to be made by somebody. It has to be shipped. It has to be moved. You know, it's a big hunk of stuff. There are lots and lots of other people who are going to be involved in that process. So while I can tweak the probability of it happening, there may be lots of other people along the way who are thinking, oh, no, you don't. That's not part of my reality that I'm just going to give this to you. No. So when you're thinking about things that need to happen in the real world, they're uncontrolled because you don't know how many other people are involved in order to make the thing that you want to show up. So it becomes a much more complicated thing. It's not simply pushing probabilities around, but pushing things around that other people may not want to get pushed. It's far more complicated.
Exactly. And which also brings to what people call the collective consciousness.
Right.
So, so are we all as a collective as well projecting certain things that are manifesting consciously or unconsciously?
Right.
And this is such an important topic because like you were saying, if it's just me and the one object is one thing, it's almost like I can control as much as possible that space, that interaction. But when everybody's creating at the same time something that ends up affecting everybody, for example,
right.
What's happening right now, in the world.
Yeah.
For example, a virus shows up and affects everybody on the planet. So how, from your perspective, how does that sort of thing get created?
Well, pandemics are being created all the time. I mean, there are viruses out there all the time. With climate change, there probably will be an increasing number of viruses that are coming for lots of different reasons. The permafrost is melting, and so things that were frozen for 100,000 years are released upon us. And we're destroying forest environments and causing animals to come out where they may have never come out before. And then we eat them, and then we have a new virus. So there are lots of very mundane reasons for expecting and knowing, actually, that pandemics COVID is not the end of the pandemics. It's probably the beginning of the bad ones. So that we don't need to go into spooky areas to figure out what's going on there. On the other hand, could we mentally affect the spread of pandemics? I think the answer is yes. We can do it in a probabilistic way. We might be able to prevent it from mutating or cause it to mutate in a form that's less infectious. The problem is that because we now also live in a time when people don't believe the news anymore, there's an enormous number of people who think that the whole thing is fake. I mean, it just blows my mind that there are people out there who think that this is a hoax, with people dying over this. So if you think then again about how coherent is the collective mind thinking about this? Well, you have some people who recognize it for what it is, and you have a whole bunch of other people who say, oh, no, you don't. And so this creates like a foaming of intentions. And when you have foaming of intentions, there's no force behind it at all.
Okay. Yeah. And to me also, people talk about the critical mass, like you have to have enough people or more people on one side of the coin, if you will, to affect the other side. Do you believe in this theory? I have my own theory on this, but let me know what you think.
I think it can help.
Mm-hmm.
It can help it, but it doesn't scale linearly. Right? So 1,000 people is not better than one. And it's largely because to get actual coherence among 1,000 people to be in the same mental wavelength is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Right. So even within one person to have high coherence about a particular desire is difficult. You have 2 people, it's really difficult. You have 1,000, it's impossible. So the only places where we see something like that happening is not so much on intention, right? Because it's hard to focus intention, but rather attention. So you take something like in the old days when people could get together, at the opening ceremony of the Olympics,
Yes.
you might have 100 million people all paying close attention, kind of in the same wavelength, just watching the ceremony because it's fun.
Yeah.
So coherent attention can occur, and it does occur. Even now, though, it's beginning to fall apart because depending on what media you're watching,
Right.
unless you're watching a live event that is going to attract a lot of people's attention, it doesn't work the same way it used to because there's so much churning that's going on in the way that the media works.
So have you been able to detect anything with a random number generator with the COVID thing? Or like, for example, when we hear the news in New York City or New York State has that many, are you able to detect some changes or what's happened with that?
Well, so the Global Consciousness Project is the name of this program that has had random number generators located around the world.
Right.
So this program has been going for 23 years now. It's continuing to go. So we get data all the time, every second. That project was planned for events that were pretty short, like would take place over an hour or 6 hours or perhaps a day.
Okay.
So we're looking essentially at impulses, like a huge amount of attention suddenly happens. Well, that we can detect in this system. You can't always see it in any one event, but over long term, there's no doubt that something happens to randomness when a lot of people are paying attention, not intention, but attention. So because I have the entire database now, I did a different kind of analysis than we usually do. I simply said, let's look at this over the course of years.
Right.
What are trends over years? So I did that. And what you see then is you see some blips going up and down depending on who's the president and what gigantic thing has occurred. And so the end of this sequence now is COVID because it's relatively new. Right. From a 23-year perspective, it's new. It just happened. But if you imagine a kind of a random walk going and we get to around January 1st, boom, the curve just goes straight down. And so this is not over yet. So it's continuing to go down. What downward direction means, I don't know. But what I can say is that it's extremely different than what we've seen in the past 23 years.
That's January of this year.
Around January, yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a very strong deviation in randomness. Again, we've never looked at something that is unfolding over many months.
Yeah.
It's been over 6 months already. We'll know in another 10 years, perhaps. If all this goes away and we're back to whatever normal is, that we'll see kind of a random walk and then boom, and then we're slowly coming back to normal.
Interesting. Because actually this thing happened kind of more in March, right? I mean, gradually, it was a gradual thing, but.
Right, so the resolution, since I'm looking at 2-year sliding window, it's not, it can't really tell precisely. But what I can say that given a 2-year window looking at this at around January, boom.
Wow, fascinating. So do you think there's hope or there's a way, even though it's very chaotic, and also even when we do it with 3 people or 10 people in a class, and we say, let's all focus on the water to change its pH or whatever, or move this object, even then, each person is doing it differently. And I find that that's a problem. So even though the intention is, yes, we want the piece of paper to move, we all do, but one person would be saying, move clockwise. The other one would be saying, move or the other one person would be saying, I'm pushing the air molecules, or, so I find that that's also a problem. It's and also the insecurities or the blocks that come up for one person when one is already projecting, the other one is like, wait, what should I do? The confusion. So that's probably also part of the chaos. But at least if the intention, the final result is focused on in a way that for example, we want COVID, just because it's the subject of of the day. We want this virus to just disappear, as quickly as possible, like within a week, for example, even though it already has enough momentum, but something like that, or at least stop the deaths. So even though our way of interacting is different and it's a little bit all over the place, the fact that we all want that final result, could that still happen, you think?
Well, yeah, any intention that anybody has is going to have an effect. The question is how fast and how big.
Yeah.
In addition, as I already said, that there are people who think it's a hoax, so they wouldn't want to play this game. They would play the opposite game, and so you get a gigantic mishmash of competing intentions. And as you said, unconsciously, most of these phenomena bubble up from the unconscious, and by definition, you're not aware of what unconscious things are going on. We see in experiments, for example, that will tell somebody to look at a graph on the screen and make the line go up.
Right.
And that's linked to a random generator or something. It's linked to some physical system. And so the person knows exactly what they're supposed to do, and the line goes down. And the line goes down significantly. So the person is not consciously trying to do that, but because it goes down significantly, it's not chance. They did, it's like, as you said, a long-term baseline's not doing anything. Okay, make it go up. Boom, it goes down.
I know.
That suggests that at some deep level, some unconscious level, the person is maybe afraid of seeing the world behave according to their wishes, because it's a pretty common fear to think that we're really that powerful. Like I can push the world around like that. So unconsciously, the fear can turn it right around. So you expand that out to 1,000 people, and half are really pushing this way, and half are pushing that way. And even though they're in alignment with the goal is, don't even worry about the individual methods that are being used, but even the goal can be reversed.
Yeah, and also it's not so clear, because I remember when I was in Florida, and we have this like category 5 hurricane coming straight at us. So we would all focus on, we don't want it, like we would blow on it, so to speak. We wanted to avoid Florida, avoid us. But then sometimes it would avoid and go hit like North Carolina, it's like the specificity of the intention is so fascinating. But even with that, what I noticed, just like what you said in the beginning, for example, I would try to influence the object to rotate to the right. And exactly at that time, it would rotate to the left. So it would be like, okay, so it is significant because it's exactly at the time after we measured the baseline. But it begs the question, wait, does that mean that it's my subconscious mind that wanted it to do something different? Or does it have any sort of its own consciousness in a way that it's responding to of course, the consciousness of a piece of paper is not the same as my consciousness, not the same as the dog or what have you. But does it have its own inherent something that is responding to me during that interaction? What do you think about that?
Well, it might. And maybe the reason why it goes opposite to your intention is because the object gets the sense, whatever that means, that it needs to move. So it does the easiest thing that it can do. Well, maybe at that moment, the momentum internally in the thing said it's going to be easier to go that way, so I'm going to do that. Because otherwise, at the moment we're dealing with a model here, a speculative model, that doesn't involve force. It involves something that's coming inherently within the object itself. And so we don't know what all the parameters are internally into a system, but we know if you go down deep enough into the quantum realm, that there's atoms jiggling all over the place constantly. So if it is then sensitive to a mental command is too strong of a word, but a correlation, it wants to shift according to the mental correlation, it will shift in the way that it can at that time.
I agree.
So people would say then, well, if this psychokinetic stuff is really real, then why can't you levitate a rock? Why can't you just shove a rock? Well, because the system, first of all, has an enormous amount of momentum. It doesn't want to move.
Right.
And even if it did want to move, we don't know how to measure it. We don't know how to measure what it can do. So you can't push against something that it won't inherently be able to do, which is why we don't use rocks as generally as things that are targets of psychokinetic effects.
Yeah, and also I think it has to do with the level of uncertainty, because even though we are dealing with forces or a science or what have you that is not the Newtonian laws, or the laws of gravity or whatever, but still we're still operating within the system. In other words, we're still even visualizing or imagining that we are heating up the temperature around the piece of paper to make it move, or increasing multiplying the air molecules or what have you. So, so we're still kind of using, even though it's the mind that is initiating the process, we're still using natural forces in that sense, because we're thinking of temperature change or air molecules. And so if you have an object so you want to create an experiment or demonstrate that with the least amount of uncertainty, which is put it on a piece of, a thin piece of paper that's very light, that can rotate easily, as opposed to, trying to move a rock, which will require a lot more amount of movement. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So the targets that are typically used in these experiments are things that don't require a lot of external pushing in order to do something.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, it makes sense to do that, because among other things, the effects that we see, even among people who are quite talented in this, they tend to be very small. They're tiny little effects. And this is why we have to do experiments again and again and again with lots of people.
Yes.
And then you can make an assessment as to what is actually going on. Because one of the downfalls, or one of the difficulties of using something like a feather or a rotating piece of paper, is that it might just happen all by itself, right? I mean, if it's so sensitive that just a stray piece of air or a vibration or something could cause it to move, you need to run baselines, you need to do all of the things that you're familiar with in order to make sure that it's not an accidental movement. And again, that's why replication is so important.
Sure. And as you know, we use the Faraday cage to make sure it's not air, it's not electromagnetism. And so it's fascinating. But I want to see, I mean, I can talk to you like for hours on this stuff, because I mean, obviously it's fascinating. I have to ask though, before, if there are any questions. So I'm assuming you're using the word mind and consciousness interchangeably, correct? So consciousness, mind, affecting matter. Is
kind of, yeah. So I use the word consciousness mainly to refer to awareness.
Okay.
It's the capacity to be aware of things other than yourself, and also self-awareness. Whereas mind is more like what we think of as thoughts, attention, intention. It's different than cognitive capacity, because cognitive capacity is more like analytical things and reading and talking and like mental apparatus. I think a lot of that actually is being generated in the brain. That's brain stuff. Mind is more like subjective experience, or more subtle forms of awareness, and then consciousness is just pure awareness.
So what about when people talk about spirit? What is spirit for you? What is, and what is it, an energy, or is it an actual substance? I mean, how do you define spirit?
I don't, because I have no idea what it is.
Okay.
And the same goes for words like spiritual.
Right.
So what does spiritual mean? I think what it means, or what people use it to mean, is something like an experience of transcendence of themselves.
Of the mind or the consciousness, or both?
Whatever they think of as themself, which is like the self-consciousness, self-awareness, experience that transcends the usual boundaries of space and time. So you're feeling expanded in space-time, or you get a glimpse of the future, or you get a glimpse of what's happening on the other side of the world. That's the domain that people talk about as spiritual. I think. On the
Yeah.
other hand, if you ask 1,000 people, you're going to get 1,000 different answers.
Of
And that's
course.
why there is no easy answer to
Yeah.
that question.
Of course, but I love to ask you these questions. So, anyway, I want to make sure. Is there anybody who has a question for Dean right now? Michael, on your side, I can see a lot of comments. So interesting, fascinating, intriguing. I love that. But are there any questions?
The only one I'm afraid we probably don't have time for because it involves simulation theory, and I don't know if that would work in a couple minutes, or if Dr. Radin wants to encroach on that. It's been a fascinating hour.
Yeah.
Listening to the different quantitative methods that have been applied to the different subjects in this movie with two experts in the subject matter. I think everybody's just really fascinated. And I love the answer regarding spirit. I mean, it's just perfect from a scientific point of view, and it's just really what can we measure and what can we repeat over and over again.
Yeah, but I would like to, if you don't mind, that was one of my questions too, because we talk about this briefly in the film. So is this then, okay, you describe your definition or your perspective on what reality is, but does that mean it's real? Or is it still a projection, therefore it's virtual, therefore it's a simulation?
Well, my problem with
the fact that we are producing an effect.
right.
So is this a real effect that everybody can observe, or is it still a projection that basically?
Well, so we know that the effects are real in the sense that in science, the currency of reality in science is that independent people can do similar events, similar tasks, similar experiments, and get similar results. Right? We create our idea of reality based on a consensus opinion. That's what reality is. And physics is good enough in terms of its description of the world, the behavior of the physical world, that it allows us to do this kind of technology. Right? This wouldn't work if the laws of physics weren't stable enough to allow us to learn something and then use it. We're in a very different realm the moment we start thinking about consciousness, because it's not mathematical. It doesn't seem to fit into science very well, because now we're talking about not the external world that we can all agree upon, but some internal world that I think it actually does overlap between people. My consciousness and yours is not significantly different. In fact, it may be exactly the same thing, in which case the projection that's going on is I am projecting my consciousness as though it's in here. That's like our everyday way of being, that I'm in here somehow. And yet when we have those experiences, telepathy, clairvoyance, whatever, the reason it's weird is because suddenly apparently I'm not just in here. I'm like everywhere. I'm in your head. I'm in the universe. I'm everywhere. So it's that domain, this domain of consciousness, which I think is when people talk about spirits and spiritual experiences and mysticism and psychic awareness and all that, it's not part of the physical world as currently understood by science. That's why you don't see this in mainstream science. You see this only at the edge, at the leading edge of science today, where finally scientists are recognizing that consciousness is actually something that's very interesting to study. And this is relatively new. It's only like the last 30 years where scientists have begun to say, we're a little bit like fish swimming in the ocean. And no one thought to ask, what is water?
Yeah, I love that.
Not the immediate, intimate thing that you know. In fact, the only thing that you know is your awareness. But it was so invisible that up until recently, it wasn't considered an object of scientific attention.
Right.
Whereas within parapsychology, which is the domain of science that does study these things, that has always been the object of attention. So we have seen many, many years, over a century, of parapsychology being considered as being on the fringe because it wasn't part of the scientific debate. Well, it's coming out of the fringe now because people are beginning to recognize that actually that is a domain of science, and we can answer, or we could ask interesting questions and use the tools of science to actually study it. So I noticed, just to make a note here, that you used the word parapsychology and was a little apologetic about it. But in fact, the Parapsychological Association began in 1959, I think, 56, something like that. And has been an affiliate, an elected affiliate of the American Association for the Advancement of Science since 1969. That means that anybody who says parapsychology is not science or parapsychology is a pseudoscience or anything like that is wrong, because the body of organizations that define what science is, the AAAS, they published the journal Science, we are a member of that, our organization. So the problem is that parapsychology is sometimes used as a synonym for someone who's like a paranormal researcher or psychic. And so it's a misuse of the term.
I love that. Thanks for the reminder. And that's exactly what I mean, is that this is legitimate science, and just the para, makes it sound or come across that way. And this is so not true. Right. And so, but the fact that these scientific laws are different and we haven't gotten there yet. I mean, it's still kind of in the process of being figured out, so to speak. And it has made a lot of huge advancements, but because of that, I think for me, it doesn't negate the fact that this is very legitimate. Because if you break the laws of the universe, that we know of once, to me, that's good enough, because technically that shouldn't happen. Yeah. And even if the effect is small, even like I remember the very first time that I did telekinesis long distance. So it was 1,000 miles away, and I had never done it before. And so they told me, well, do you want to try? We put it under glass and it's contained and Faraday this or whatever. I said, but I've never done it before, And then I thought, okay, I'll try it. So the very first time it moved about like 3 degrees or something like that. And so I thought, oh, that's nothing, and we all dismissed it. But then I said, wait. How come it doesn't move, for hours? And exactly at that time, it moves 3 degrees. So maybe 3 degrees is very small, but it shouldn't have moved, period. And so that got me to continue. And then the next time it moved 10 degrees. And then the next time it moved 20 degrees. So that's kind of, what I feel like there is something. There are laws. Right. The fact that we don't know all the laws that govern consciousness doesn't mean they're not there.
Right. So take your own skepticism about your initial result. It took more than that even to convince you who had done it.
Yes.
So now expand that into the tens of millions of scientists out there who may not have never tried this before. And all they've ever heard about these things is probably wrong, because they read Wikipedia, which much of it is wrong. And so they would remain very skeptical until they do it themselves.
Yes.
So I know scientists who would never admit this in public, but they've done things like bending spoons in a way that you can't do by force. So they're convinced by their own single experience that something happened, but this is not something that will convince anybody else.
Yeah.
And so we're still at the very early stages here of expanding this into a science that will be recognized by everyone.
And I know you bent a spoon.
Yeah, no, before I bent the bowl of a big soup spoon in half, I wasn't sure myself whether I even believed it.
See?
No, I know that I've heard lots of friends talking about bending spoons and whatever, and I said, yeah, sure. And then I did it. And so now I can't deny that it's possible, even though I have no explanation as to how I did it. And I've met other people who have learned about what I did, and they admit kind of quietly that it's a real thing and they don't know what to do with it. So, yeah.
Did you bend it with both hands? Like you felt it melt, or did you just?
Well, I was holding it in one hand and then had the bowl, and I pinched the bowl in half.
Yeah. That's incredible. That's incredible. You guys heard this, that even when it happens, like we were talking about the blindfolds as well. When it happens, we still can't realize, like we're like, what did this just happen?
Yeah.
And so I think it's incredible that, it's just starting. And I think also with the film, what I'm trying to do is say, first of all, something's happening. This thing is real. And way too many people are doing this all over. It's not like some monks in the Himalayas or, doing meditation all day longer. Any random person can learn this and do it. Therefore, we have this inherent ability. So that's what I'm hoping to do with the film, just to kind of encourage people to just do it and not worry about it and see how far we can take this. Because if I can change the pH of water in 10 minutes, then perhaps I can use the same thing to apply it to my body, and so on and so forth. So then we learn to use our own power, our own mind to affect our bodies and our reality in this way.
Right.
So, all right, you guys. So if there's anything else, we're gonna wrap up here with Dr. Radin. Is there anything else, Michael, from your side? All the comments, you should read the comments. Super cool, fascinating conversation. It's like we so need to hear from you about your perspective on this, because many people like myself have experienced these things. It's like, this is who we are, and you doubt it, but after a while you have so much validation over validation, even working with other people and energy healing. Like, wait, the x-rays showed this, now it shows that. The blood test showed this, now it shows that. Exactly after the session. Okay, it's a coincidence. Fine. Let's have more. But you keep having these coincidences. So you bring so much support, so much encouragement, so much validation to so many people. So I'm just so grateful for you.
Thank you.
All right, Michael. So if you don't have anything, we're going to sign off here. Is there anything on your...
We're good to go. Again, lots of positive comments on Facebook and YouTube. And my only suggestion is, when can we have Dr. Radin on again for another live interview? Because it's been fascinating.
He's gonna have to think about that. I'm sure he's very busy. I'm just so grateful that you were in the film and you came out here again to talk about this such important conversation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. So you guys, let me see. Hey, so you guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I mean, I'm just like ecstatic here. This guy is at the forefront of this whole subject matter. So if you would like to leave a comment or a question or anything like that, we will try to come back and answer your questions at a certain point. But also, don't forget, please watch the film, superhumanfilm.com. The links are also in the chat and in the description. So make sure you watch it and you tell all your friends about it. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to this channel. It's free of charge, and it just helps us out. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me next time with more incredible guests and cast members from the film, and incredible individuals. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.